Hi, we just finished a 3-month road trip traveling through the Balkans. So here are 4 things we wish we knew before we got started. Here is a list of places that we travelled to on our trip. Now, road tripping through the Balkans is completely different than travelling around Western Europe because the Balkans are not in the Schengen zone. The Schengen zone is an open border policy where you can cruise through without border or passport control, and the Balkans is completely separate to that. When you go through any country in the Balkans, you need to stop for passport control and border control. You have a different currency in all the countries and completely different phone plans, which is what we're going to speak to you about today. The first thing to say about border crossings is that they were relatively easy. There is so much cack on the internet about troubles at border crossings, and we did not have that experience at all. The biggest problem that we might have had is just the wait times. The wait times crossing into Montenegro from Albania and into Bulgaria from Serbia was super long, but other than that, it was an absolute breeze. So let's talk about the process of getting across the border, starting with passport control. Tyler was travelling on his Australian passport and I was travelling on my Irish, which is a part of the EU. Now, a couple of the countries in the Balkans are a part of the EU, but they're not a part of the Schengen zone. So Bulgaria, Greece and Croatia are all a part of the EU. So when we were entering through those countries, there were 2 lines and they were for EU passports and non. Because Tyler had his Australian, we went through the non-EU passport line in those instances and the process was easy. For everything else, when we went through, you hand over your passports and they'll stamp you out of the country. When you get to that second checkpoint and they're stamping you into the new country, this is when you'll have to get your car checked. Tyler and I own our British car, so when we rolled up to the second checkpoint, we made sure that we had our ownership papers, our registration papers, and our insurance documents. In some instances, they didn't want to see anything. In other instances, they wanted to see everything. So just make sure you have them there ready to go. This second stop where you get stamped into the country is also the place where the custom control happens. We saw custom officers and police officers at all of the border crossings where we passed. In our experience, we weren't really stopped and checked thoroughly. On a couple of occasions, they had a look over the car, they asked us what was in the car, we told them we were on holiday and it was just food and clothes, and we were sent on our way. We did see people being checked more thoroughly at some of the border crossings, so it is obviously on a case-by-case basis, but we didn't have any troubles at all. The last important thing to note when you're crossing the border is that in some instances, you need some specialised paperwork, but this only applies to Bulgaria and to Albania. As you're crossing the border into Bulgaria, you need to have something called an e-vignette. This is something that you can either purchase online in advance for €7 by typing e-vignette into your phone, or you can buy it at the border for €10. If you're going to buy it at the border, there's heaps of booths and you just need to pull over and walk into one. But the only downside is this, besides the difference in the cost, is that you exit the border crossing line in order to go and purchase it. And then have to re-enter. And crossing into Bulgaria was a really long day, so I'd advise you to do this in advance. Crossing into Albania, you need to get something called a green card, which is what you purchase after you've already crossed the border. We did not buy a green card when we got through. It seemed really out of place. There was one man in one little booth and we felt that it was a cash grab. It seemed really unprofessional. He walked up and showed a piece of scrap paper and wrote €49, and so we ignored him. Turns out it's something that you absolutely need. It's your insurance while you're in Albania, and the driving in Albania is really problematic, so it was scary not having that for the week that we were there. It's not something that you can buy in a booth or in a shop or online anywhere else. It can only be done at the border crossing. So make sure wherever you're entering into Albania, if someone approaches you and offers you to buy a green card, spend that €49 and buy it. Right, let's talk about cash monies because it isn't straightforward travelling through the Balkans. Most of the Balkans are outside of the EU, which means that they don't use the euro currency. This is true except for Greece and for Montenegro. Croatia is another case altogether. Croatia is inside the EU, but as of 2022, they don't use the EU currency. And in 2023, they're supposed to be changing over to the euro. So just check that for whenever you're traveling. The next part is about getting money out at ATMs. If you haven't brought cash with you and you're getting your money out at ATMs, just heed warning and never go to a Euronet ATM. Ever, ever, ever. They'll charge you an absolute fortune, give you a terrible conversion rate, and it's just daylight robbery, so don't do it. If you are going to take your money out at an ATM, go to one of the major banks, and as you're taking the money out, you'll be asked what the conversion rate is that you want to accept. You can either accept that bank's conversion rate or not. Always choose not to accept that bank's conversion rate. Again, they charge you a really astronomical conversion rate charge, and they don't have really generous rates. Let your bank at home, whichever one you belong to, decide what the rate is. It's always more generous and the fees aren't as much. And finally, once you're done with that country and you're traveling to a new one, if you have any leftover cash, get it converted. We made a huge mistake. We collected all the scraps and bits and pieces throughout all our travels and thought that when we finished our trip in Dubrovnik, we could just walk into a currency conversion place and get it exchanged. This does not work. We've ended up carrying around a bunch of different currencies because they don't accept other Balkans currencies in each of the countries. And in the case of Albania, the Albanian lek is a closed currency, a terminology we have just learnt when we had about 150 euros worth of Albanian lek to convert, and we couldn't. We couldn't do it in Dubrovnik, we couldn't do it in the major airports in London, so we're still carrying around that currency, and we're not sure what to do with it except to go back to Albania. So make sure as you're leaving each of the countries, you get your money exchanged. Again, because the Balkans isn't in the EU, it means that when you enter any new country, you need to get a new phone plan. The good news is that a lot of the countries provide phone plans that are inexpensive and give you a huge data option. The biggest problem is when you're crossing over the border. You're gonna lose your reception as you're carrying over, and then it's usually a couple hours drive before you get into the next major city. Our suggestion is that when you're punching through the destination to your next location when you're crossing a border, is make sure that you've got the entire trip put up on your Google Maps and then hold it on there. When the entire trip's loaded, even when you cross the border and you lose reception in that new country, your Google Maps will continue to take you to your course. So that was a really easy way that we got to our destination without any dramas. But once you get into a new country, the thing to do is to decide which carrier you're going to go with. We'll give you a list of all of the providers that we went to in the major countries, but the hint is that when you have a SIM card, like we did in England, when you cross over to the border, it will connect to the local carrier and will say in the top left-hand corner of your screen who that is. For example, in Serbia, the provider is Yetl. So that'll come up in your top corner and you'll know that that probably has the best reception, and that is the phone provider that you should go to get a tourist SIM. Phone plans range between 10 to 15 euro, and all you need to do when you go into the store is make sure that you have your phone unlocked so you can put any SIM card in, and also have your passport with you to sign you up because you won't be given one without it. The last thing we need to discuss is language and culture. So let's start off by talking about safety, because that's a question that we got asked a lot when we told our friends and family. They were really concerned that going through the Balkans, and particularly road tripping, where we'll be in isolated places, that would be putting ourselves in danger. There are a lot of stereotypes about Eastern Europe, and in our experience, we found it to be so safe, so friendly, and a really wonderful time. As English speakers without a second language, we were able to spend our time in the Balkans without any troubles communicating with locals. We made the effort to learn hello, please, and thank you in all of the different languages of the countries that we visited, and mostly we were able to muddle through with Google Translate, but for the most part, people spoke English. Some things to expect when you're traveling throughout the Balkans once you leave the coast is that the food options become a little bit limited. We spent a lot of time in apartments cooking for ourselves because we were on such a prolonged trip, and I found it a little bit confronting at times not being able to get basic spices like chili in places and an array of vegetables. Your root vegetables are really what's on offer, and there's a lot of stodgy foods available, so maybe just prepare yourself for that change in diet when you're going through. Generally, it was inexpensive to road trip across Eastern Europe because the petrol prices were really reasonable and far cheaper than in the Western countries. Even in some places, there was a consistent price throughout the entire country. So we didn't have to try and track down the best cheap price in places in Croatia and Bulgaria because they were exactly the same no matter where you went. All of your information about what to see, where to stay, the cost of accommodation are things that can be easily researched, and we found it really inexpensive to travel throughout the Balkans. So those are things that you can look at yourself or watch the rest of our videos and see us fumble our way through it. But I will say the one thing that we didn't do that we wish that we did at the very beginning is just buying bloody beach shoes for the beaches throughout Montenegro, Albania and Croatia, because they are stony and they will absolutely cut your feet up. We got a few weeks in and we're like, oh, we didn't do it at the start, we won't get our money's worth now. So when you get there, just bloody buy them. Doesn't matter that you look ridiculous, everyone else is wearing them, and just lean into it. As a disclaimer, we bought our car in England, and so all the information about border crossings is specific to owning a car. If you are planning on hiring a car to do this trip, it's a whole different beast, so you'll have to go get your information somewhere else. Thanks heaps for watching. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, chuck them in the comments and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, click the link and watch our Balkans adventure here.